There was a time when fashion moved slowly. Designers created collections months in advance. Factories produced thousands of pieces, and retailers filled their stores, hoping customers would buy what they had predicted. But then, a company from Spain changed the rules. Zara. Zara didn't become a fashion giant by simply making beautiful clothes. It built something far more powerful. A system designed to understand what customers wanted and respond to it faster than almost anyone else. While traditional fashion brands were planning months ahead, Zara was watching the present. What were people buying? What were they ignoring? Which colors were suddenly becoming popular? Which styles were disappearing? And what did customers want next? Then Zara would take that information and turn it into products. Fast, sometimes incredibly fast. This approach transformed a relatively small Spanish retailer into one of the world's most powerful fashion businesses. But here's where the story gets interesting. Zara's biggest competitive advantage isn't actually its clothing. It's the system behind the clothing. A system built around speed, customer data, flexible production, limited inventory, and psychology. Zara understood something most retailers struggled with. You don't always have to predict the future if you can react to the present faster than everyone else. But how did Zara build this extraordinary system? Why does Zara constantly change what's inside its stores? Why can a product disappear almost as quickly as it appeared? And how did this Spanish company create a business model that competitors have struggled to copy? Because behind every Zara store, there is a machine that watches customers, collects information, moves products, creates urgency, and constantly adapts. This is the story of how Zara turned speed into power and fashion into one of the most sophisticated retail systems in the world. This is the Genius Strategy of Zara. And to understand where this strategy came from, we need to go back to Spain and to the man who started it all. To understand Zara, you first need to understand the man behind it. His name was Amancio Ortega. Ortega wasn't born into wealth. He grew up in Spain and left school at a young age. He began working in the clothing industry, learning how garments were made, how they were sold, and most importantly, what customers actually wanted. But Ortega noticed something. Traditional fashion was expensive. Clothing companies would design products, send them to factories, produce large quantities, and hope customers would buy them. If the prediction was wrong, the company was left with unsold clothes. And unsold clothes meant discounts. Discounts meant lower profits. Ortega saw an opportunity. What if fashion didn't have to depend so heavily on prediction? What if a company could make clothes, see what customers liked, and then produce more of what was working? That idea would eventually become the foundation of Zara. In 1975, Ortega opened the first Zara store in A Coruña, Spain. It was a relatively small beginning. There was no global empire, no massive advertising machine, no hundreds of stores around the world, just a simple clothing store, and a very different philosophy. Instead of asking, what will customers want 6 months from now? Ortega's approach was closer to, what do customers want right now? That small difference would eventually change the entire fashion industry. Zara began paying close attention to customers. Which products sold quickly? Which ones stayed on the racks? Which colors attracted attention? Which designs were people asking for? The answers became valuable information, and information became the fuel for the business. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Ortega wasn't simply building a clothing company. He was building a system where the customer could influence what the company produced. And that system would allow Zara to move faster, reduce some of the risks of traditional fashion, and constantly adapt to changing demand. But there was still a long way to go, because turning a small Spanish clothing store into a global fashion powerhouse would require something much bigger than a good idea. It would require an entirely new way of thinking about speed. The first Zara store opened in Spain, but Ortega had something much bigger in mind. He didn't want Zara to remain a successful local clothing store. He wanted to change the way fashion was produced, distributed, and sold. And the key wasn't simply opening more stores. It was creating a system that could support them. As Zara expanded across Spain, the company began developing something that would become one of its greatest advantages. Control. Control over design. Control over production. Control over distribution. And control over the customer experience. Instead of relying entirely on distant suppliers, Zara built a tightly connected network around its operations. This meant information could move quickly, A store could identify what customers wanted. That information could travel back through the company, and production could respond. The result was a feedback loop. Customers bought clothes. Stores observed demand. Information moved back to the company. New products were created, and those products returned to stores. Then, the cycle started again. This was very different from the traditional fashion model. Traditional brands often worked months ahead. Zara was building a business that could react continuously. And as the company expanded, that advantage became even more powerful. During the 1980s, Zara began expanding beyond its home market, first across Spain, then into other European countries, and eventually into markets around the world. But international expansion created a huge challenge. How do you maintain the same speed when your customers are thousands of miles away? The answer was logistics. Zara developed a distribution system designed to keep its stores constantly supplied with new products. Clothing would move through distribution centers, then travel to stores across different markets. The goal wasn't simply to send large amounts of inventory. It was to send the right products at the right time. That distinction was crucial, because Zara wasn't trying to fill every store with enormous quantities. It wanted stores to feel fresh, new, different, and constantly changing. This created another powerful effect. Customers couldn't assume that the product they saw today would still be there next week, and that would eventually become one of Zara's greatest weapons: scarcity. But before Zara could turn scarcity into a strategy, it needed something else, something that would make the entire system work: speed. If there's one word that explains Zara's success, it's speed. But not the kind of speed you see on a racetrack. Zara's real advantage is the speed at which it can turn information into products. Think about how traditional fashion works. A designer creates a collection. The company plans production. Factories manufacture the clothing. Products are shipped around the world, and eventually, they arrive in stores. The entire process can take months. That creates a problem, because fashion doesn't wait. A trend can appear on social media, become popular, and disappear before a traditional retailer can even react. Zara built its business around this problem. Instead of making one huge bet on what customers might want, it could produce smaller quantities, watch what happened, and then respond. If customers loved a particular design, the company had a signal: produce more. If customers ignored it, there was less inventory sitting around waiting to be sold. This changes the economics of fashion. Imagine two companies. Company A produces 100,000 jackets. Before knowing whether customers will like them, Company B produces a smaller number, tests demand, and then decides what to produce next. If the trend suddenly changes, which company is taking the bigger risk? Obviously, Company A. Zara's model is designed to reduce that risk. But speed isn't only about production. It's also about decision-making. A store manager, a designer, a buyer, and a production team all need to react quickly. The faster information moves through the organization, the faster the company can respond. And that's where Zara's business model becomes extremely difficult to copy. Competitors can copy a dress. They can copy a store design. They can even copy the idea of releasing new products frequently. But copying the entire system is much harder, because speed requires coordination. It requires factories, suppliers, logistics, technology, designers, stores, and thousands of decisions happening together. Zara essentially built a feedback loop. Customer behavior creates information. Information influences production. Production creates new products. New products return to customers. And customer behavior creates new information. Again, and again, and again. The result? Instead of trying to predict fashion perfectly, Zara created a system that could learn from fashion in real time. And this is where Zara's strategy becomes truly powerful. Because the next secret isn't speed alone. It's information. Most clothing stores have one primary purpose: sell clothes. But for Zara, the store does something else. It collects information. Every day, thousands of customers walk through Zara's doors. They look at products. They touch fabrics. They try on different sizes. They ask questions. They buy certain styles and ignore others. To most retailers, these are simply shopping decisions. To Zara, they're signals. Imagine a new jacket arrives in a store. Customers immediately start picking it up. Several people try it on. Some buy it. Others ask employees when more sizes will arrive. That's information. Now imagine another jacket. It stays on the rack. Customers walk past it. Nobody tries it on. That's information too. The difference is, Zara can use those signals to make decisions. This creates something similar to a laboratory. The company doesn't have to rely entirely on surveys, or predictions, or months-old market research. It can observe what is happening in real stores, and the store becomes part of the product development process. This is one of the most interesting parts of Zara's business model, because the customer isn't just the person who buys the final product. The customer can also influence what comes next. A popular design sends a signal. A slow-selling design sends another. A request for a different color. Another signal. A demand for another size. Another signal. And all of these signals can feed back into the organization. Think about the loop. A product enters the store. Customers react. Employees observe. Information moves back to the company. Designers and production teams respond. New products are created, and they return to the stores. The process repeats over and over again. This means Zara doesn't have to get every product right. It can experiment, test, learn, and adjust. And that is a huge advantage in an industry where predicting demand is incredibly difficult. Because fashion is emotional. People don't always know what they want until they see it. A product can look average on a designer's computer, but become extremely popular when customers see it in a store. Or the opposite can happen. A design that looks perfect can completely fail. Zara's system allows the market to provide the answer. And this leads to one of the most important principles behind the company. Don't just ask customers what they want. Watch what they actually do. Because behavior can reveal more than words. And once Zara understood how powerful customer behavior could be, it had another problem to solve. How do you produce enough without producing too much? The answer was limited inventory. Now we reach one of the most important parts of Zara's strategy. The part most customers never see. The supply chain. Because producing fashionable clothes is one thing. Getting the right clothes to the right store at the right moment is something completely different. And this is where Zara built one of its biggest competitive advantages. Traditional fashion companies often depend on long production cycles. A design may be created, orders are placed, factories produce large quantities, and the finished products travel through multiple stages before finally reaching stores. That system can work as long as demand stays predictable, but fashion is rarely predictable. Zara took a different approach. Its parent company, Inditex, built a highly coordinated business model connecting design, manufacturing, logistics, and retail. The goal was simple: keep the entire system connected. Information from stores could influence decisions about what should be produced. Production could respond to changing demand, and logistics could move products where they were needed. This created something extremely valuable: flexibility. Imagine a new trend suddenly becomes popular in London. Customers start buying a particular style. Demand increases. A slow supply chain might take months to respond. But Zara's model is designed around shorter feedback cycles. The company can monitor demand, adjust production, and move new products through its distribution network. And logistics becomes critical, because speed doesn't matter if products are sitting in a warehouse. They have to move from production to distribution to stores again and again. This is why Zara's business is not simply a fashion business. It's also a logistics business, a technology business, an information business, and a retail business, all operating together. And there's another important advantage. Zara doesn't need every store to receive exactly the same products. Different markets have different customers, different climates, different tastes, different trends. A product that works extremely well in one location may perform poorly somewhere else. So the ability to move inventory where demand exists can become incredibly valuable. Instead of treating inventory as something static, Zara treats it more like a moving system. Products flow, information flows, demand changes, and the supply chain reacts. This creates a business that can stay relatively flexible, even when fashion itself is unpredictable. But there's a hidden consequence. If customers know that products can disappear quickly, they have less reason to wait. And that's where Zara's supply chain connects directly to psychology. Because limited availability can create something incredibly powerful: urgency. Now we get to one of the smartest parts of Zara's strategy: scarcity. Most retailers want customers to believe they can come back anytime. Zara creates almost the opposite feeling. You walk into a store. You see a jacket you like. You try it on. You think, I'll come back tomorrow. But when you return, it's gone. That simple experience can completely change how a customer makes a decision. Because suddenly, waiting has a cost. The customer starts thinking, what if I don't find it again? And that's the power of scarcity. When something feels limited, people often perceive it as more valuable. Zara doesn't need to put a huge sign on the wall saying, buy now. The constantly changing inventory can create that pressure naturally. New products arrive. Other products disappear. The store looks different. The customer doesn't know exactly what will be available next week. And that uncertainty creates urgency. But there's another side to this strategy. Limited quantities can also make a product feel more exclusive. Imagine seeing the same jacket everywhere, versus finding a jacket that only a few people around you are wearing. The second experience can feel more special. This is especially powerful in fashion, because fashion isn't only about utility. People aren't buying clothes simply because they need something to wear. They're also buying identity, style, individuality, and sometimes the feeling of discovering something before everyone else. Zara's constantly changing product mix can tap directly into that psychology. But scarcity also solves a business problem. If a company produces enormous quantities of every design, and the design fails, it has a huge inventory problem. Zara's smaller batch approach can reduce that risk. A product can be tested. If customers respond positively, the company can react. If customers don't, the company hasn't committed as much inventory to that idea. So scarcity isn't just a marketing trick. It can also be part of the operating model. It connects psychology, inventory, and risk management. And this creates a fascinating cycle. Limited products create urgency. Urgency can encourage faster purchases. Faster purchases generate information. That information helps the company understand demand. And demand influences what comes next. So the customer, the product, and the supply chain all become part of the same system. But Zara had another unusual advantage. It didn't need to spin like traditional consumer brands on constant advertising. Because in Zara's world, the store itself could become the advertisement. Think about the world's biggest brands. Coca-Cola, Nike, McDonald's. They spend enormous amounts of money making sure people remember their names. Television commercials, billboards, celebrity campaigns, social media, massive advertising campaigns. But Zara historically took a very different approach. Instead of putting its brand everywhere, it focused heavily on putting its stores in the right places. Because for Zara, the store itself could become the advertisement. Think about a major shopping street, a large Zara storefront, bright windows, carefully designed displays, and new clothing constantly appearing inside. You don't necessarily need to see a television commercial. You simply walk past the store and see what's new. That creates curiosity. You walk inside and discover something different. And then, a few days later, you might come back because the store may have changed again. This is a completely different approach to marketing. Traditional advertising says, look at us. Zara's retail strategy says, come and see what's new. And that difference matters. Because fashion is visual. Customers want to see clothes. Touch them. Try them on. See how they look in real life. The physical store can provide something an advertisement cannot. An experience. And Zara invested heavily in that experience. Its stores were designed to feel modern, clean, premium, and visually consistent. The location mattered too. Zara often placed stores in major shopping districts, where large numbers of potential customers were already walking. That meant the company could benefit from natural foot traffic. But there was another important effect. When customers repeatedly see a store and notice that the products keep changing, the store can become part of their routine. You don't visit only because you need a shirt. You visit because there might be something new. And this is where Zara's previous strategies connect. Fast production creates new products. New products keep stores fresh. Fresh stores encourage repeat visits. Repeat visits create more customer information. And customer information helps Zara decide what to produce next. The store isn't just the final destination. It's another part of the feedback loop. But as the world moved online, Zara faced a new challenge. Customers no longer had to walk past a store to discover fashion. They could discover it on their phones. And that forced Zara to evolve. The next stage of its strategy would be digital. The fashion industry was changing. Customers were spending more time online. discovering trends through social media, browsing products on their phones, and buying clothes without ever stepping inside a store. For Zara, this created a new challenge. The company had built an enormous physical retail network, but now, the customer was moving somewhere else. The smartphone. Zara couldn't simply ignore that shift, so it began connecting its physical stores with the digital world. And this created a new version of the Zara experience. A customer could discover a product online, check its availability, visit a store, or purchase it digitally. The boundaries between the physical store and the online store started disappearing. And this was important, because Zara already had something many online-only competitors didn't have: thousands of physical locations. Those stores could become part of the digital system. Instead of thinking of a store as only a place where customers buy clothes, Zara could use it as part of the fulfillment network. A customer might order something online, and the product could be connected to inventory in the company's physical network. That means the stores aren't simply selling products. They're also helping Zara move products closer to customers. This is sometimes called an omnichannel strategy. The goal is simple: make the customer experience feel like one connected system, whether the customer is using a phone, a website, or walking through a store. But digital technology also gave Zara something else: more information. Online behavior can reveal what customers are searching for, what products they're viewing, what they add to their cart, and what they actually purchase. That creates another stream of signals. And Zara's entire business model is built around signals. Remember the original idea? Watch the customer, learn from the customer, react to the customer. Digital technology simply makes that loop even larger. Now Zara can observe behavior, not only inside its stores, but across its digital platforms as well. And the company has continued investing in technology, from digital store services to assisted self-checkout to newer shopping experiences powered by technology. The goal isn't technology for the sake of technology. The goal is still the same: make Zara faster, more convenient, and more responsive. But while Zara was adapting to the digital world, a new competitor was changing the rules of fast fashion. A competitor built almost entirely around the internet: ultra-low prices, and an enormous number of products. Shine. And suddenly, Zara was facing a completely different kind of challenge. For years, Zara had mastered fast fashion. But then, a new kind of competitor appeared. It wasn't built around shopping streets. It wasn't dependent on massive physical stores. And it didn't need customers to walk past a storefront. It was born online. Shine. And Shine introduced a very different approach to fashion. Instead of relying heavily on physical retail, it focused on the smartphone. Instead of producing relatively limited collections, it could test an enormous number of designs online. And instead of waiting for customers to visit a store, it could watch what millions of people were searching for, clicking on, sharing, and buying. This created a completely different feedback loop. Social media creates a trend. Customers react. Data identifies the trend. Products are created. Those products appear online. Customers respond again. And the cycle continues. In some ways, Shine took the basic logic that made Zara successful and pushed it even further into the digital world. But there was another major difference: price. Shine became known for extremely low prices and an enormous selection of products. That created a new challenge for Zara, because Zara had never really tried to be the cheapest fashion company. Its strategy was different. Zara focused on speed, store experience, design, brand positioning, and the connection between physical and digital retail. Shine was fighting a different battle: more products, more data, lower prices, more online engagement. And this created a fascinating clash. Zara had built one of the world's most sophisticated physical fashion systems. Shine built an enormous digital fashion engine. One relied heavily on stores. The other could reach customers directly through their phones. But Zara still had an advantage: its physical stores. A customer could see a Zara product in person, touch the fabric, try it on, and experience the brand. And Zara could combine that physical presence with digital technology. So the battle wasn't simply Zara versus Shine. It was really physical retail versus digital retail, brand experience versus extreme price, speed versus even more speed. And the outcome could shape the future of fashion. But there is a bigger question. Because the faster fashion becomes, the more products we buy, and the more products we throw away. And that brings us to the uncomfortable side of Zara's success: the environmental cost of fast fashion. Zara's business model is incredibly efficient, but efficiency doesn't automatically mean sustainability. And this is where the story becomes more complicated. Fast fashion depends on one powerful idea: give customers more reasons to buy new clothes, new styles, new colors, new collections, new trends. And Zara's constantly changing stores can encourage customers to return again and again. From a business perspective, that's extremely effective. But from an environmental perspective, it creates difficult questions. What happens to all those clothes? What happens when trends change? And what happens when customers decide they don't want something anymore? The fashion industry produces enormous amounts of clothing every year, and a significant amount eventually becomes waste. Clothing can be thrown away, donated, resold, or recycled. But recycling textiles at massive scale is difficult. Many garments contain blends of different materials, making them harder to separate and process. There is also the environmental cost of producing the clothes themselves: raw materials, water, energy, dyes, factories, packaging, transportation. Every step has an environmental footprint, and this creates a contradiction at the heart of fast fashion. The business model rewards constant product turnover, while sustainability often requires consuming less, buying more carefully, and keeping products for longer. Zara and its parent company, Inditex, have invested heavily in sustainability initiatives. The company has increased its use of lower impact and recycled materials, and has set targets around emissions, water, waste, and circularity. It has also expanded initiatives such as Zara Pre-Owned, which allows customers in selected markets to resell, donate, or repair garments. These efforts are important, but they don't completely remove the fundamental tension. Because even if a shirt is made from recycled material, the question remains: do we really need another shirt? That is the uncomfortable question facing the entire fashion industry. And it isn't only Zara's problem. It's a problem shared by Zara, H&M, Shine, luxury brands, and almost every major clothing retailer. The challenge is finding a way to remain profitable while reducing the environmental cost of constant consumption. And this may become one of the biggest tests of Zara's business model, because the company mastered the art of making fashion move faster. Now, it has to help figure out how fashion can become more sustainable. And despite all these challenges, there is still one question left. Why is Zara's business model so incredibly difficult to copy? So, what exactly makes Zara so difficult to copy? At first glance, the answer seems simple. Make fashionable clothes, release them quickly, open stores, and sell them. But if it were that easy, every fashion company would already have copied Zara. The reality is much more complicated. Zara's advantage isn't one secret. It's the combination of many small advantages, working together. First, speed. Zara built a system designed to react quickly to changing demand. Second, information. Customer behavior can influence what happens next. Third, supply chain control. Design, production, logistics, and retail are tightly connected. Fourth, scarcity. Limited quantities can create urgency, while also reducing the risk of massive unsold inventories. And fifth, the stores. Zara's physical locations aren't simply places to sell clothes. They're part of the brand, part of the customer experience, and part of the information system. Now imagine a competitor trying to copy all of this. They would need a sophisticated supply chain, fast production, efficient logistics, technology, experienced designers, thousands of stores, strong brand recognition, and most importantly, a culture built around speed. Copying one part is easy. Copying the entire machine is incredibly difficult. That's the real competitive advantage. Zara doesn't have a single moat. It has several moats, connected together. And when those advantages reinforce each other, the system becomes much harder to attack. This is perhaps the most important lesson from Zara. A great business doesn't always win because it has one revolutionary idea. Sometimes, it wins because it builds dozens of good ideas and connects them better than everyone else. But there is still one final question. After decades of success, what can the rest of the business world actually learn from Zara? And the answer may be much bigger than fashion. So, what can we actually learn from Zara? The story isn't really about clothes. It's about speed. It's about understanding your customers and being willing to change when their behavior changes. Zara didn't become successful because it could predict every trend. It became successful because it didn't need to. It built a system that could listen, learn, adapt, and respond. That is the real genius behind the company. A competitor can copy a product. It can copy a store. It can copy a marketing idea. But copying an entire business system is much harder. And that's the lesson every entrepreneur can take from Zara. Don't just build a product. Build a system that gets better every time a customer interacts with it. Because in a world where trends change faster, technology evolves faster, and competition becomes more intense, the companies that survive won't necessarily be the ones that predict the future. They'll be the ones that can adapt to it fastest. Zara transformed fashion by turning speed into a competitive advantage. And that is why the genius strategy of Zara was never really about selling more clothes. It was about building a business that could keep learning, keep moving, and keep changing. Business Decoded. Behind every billion-dollar brand is a story. 2-second pause. If you enjoyed uncovering the business strategy behind the genius strategy of Zara and want to discover the hidden stories behind the world's biggest brands, make sure to subscribe to Business Decoded. Every week, we break down the companies, the strategies, and the decisions that shaped the modern world. Because behind every billion-dollar brand, there's a story worth decoding. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next documentary.